The chapel roof was the only blind spot in the entire castle. Every terrace, every courtyard, every corridor at Colditz had a guard post with a clean line of sight. But the roofline above the chapel, the highest point of the fortress, jutting out over a 75-meter drop to the River Mulde, sat at an angle that no sentry tower could see. Tony Rolt noticed it in the winter of 1943. He wasn't an airman. He was a 25-year-old lieutenant in the Rifle Brigade who'd been captured during the siege of Calais 3 years earlier, awarded the Military Cross for carrying a wounded man under fire while shooting a Bren gun with one hand. He'd escaped from German camps 7 times. Dressed as a workman. Joined a general's entourage. Got within sight of the Swiss border once. 7 attempts, 7 recaptures. They sent him to Colditz because they'd run out of places to put him. Colditz Castle sat on a rocky spur in Saxony, 250 feet above the town below. Walls 7 feet thick at the base. A single access road. Barbed wire, floodlights, and guard rotations designed to be unpredictable. The nearest Allied territory was 400 miles away. The Germans called it escape-proof. They were looking down, always down. Checking for tunnels, listening for scraping beneath the floors. Nobody looked up. Rolt looked up. He saw snowflakes rising on updrafts above the chapel roof. And he thought, if air can carry snow upward from that roof, it can carry a man across the river. He needed someone who understood flight. He found 2. Flight Lieutenant Bill Goldfinch, 28, from Whitstable, Kent, an RAF pilot who'd flown Sunderland flying boats during the evacuation of Greece before his plane capsized off Crete and he was captured. And Flight Lieutenant Jack Best, another RAF man, quiet and methodical, the kind of person who could build a precision tool from a stolen razor blade. Goldfinch and Best had already tried escaping together from Stalag Luft 3, tunneled out, stolen a rowing boat, got caught sleeping on the wrong bank of the Oder River. The Germans called them the 2 old crows, and shipped them to Colditz as incorrigibles. In the prison library, Goldfinch found a 2-volume textbook, Aircraft Design by C. H. Latimer Needham. He read it cover to cover. Then he read it again. Then he started drawing. The plan was precise. They would build a 2-seat glider in the attic above the chapel, behind a false wall that would hide the workshop from guards. The glider would have a wingspan of 32 feet and weigh 240 pounds. On launch night, during an air raid blackout when the floodlights went dark, they'd knock a hole in the attic wall, drag the glider onto the roof, attach the wings, and set it on a 60-foot runway built from tables. A bathtub filled with concrete, roughly a ton of dead weight, would be attached to a pulley system. Drop the bathtub off the roof. The falling weight accelerates the glider to 30 miles per hour. The chapel roof sits 75 meters above the Mulde River. 9 seconds of flight. 450 meters of glide. 2 men land in a meadow on the far side of the river and disappear into the Saxon countryside. 9 seconds. That was the entire window between captivity and freedom. Goldfinch designed every structural element by hand. More than 30 wing ribs, each one carved from stolen bed slats. The wing spars came from floorboards pried up in sections so small the gaps wouldn't be noticed. Control cables were stripped from electrical wiring in abandoned corridors of the castle. Best built the tools, a fret saw from razor blades, clamps from bed frames, drills from sharpened nails. Every component was crafted by hand in a space 20 feet long and 7 feet wide. The attic above the chapel. 4 men could fit inside at a time. No more. The false wall was their masterpiece. Painted shutters and plaster, matched to the surrounding stonework, sealed with mud. From 3 feet away, it looked like the back of an ordinary attic. Behind it, 600 individually carved wooden pieces slowly becoming an aircraft. The Germans inspected the attic twice. They saw nothing. Rolt organized the operation like a military campaign. 12 men became apostles, the inner circle who took shifts in the workshop. 40 more became stooges, lookouts positioned along every corridor and stairwell between the guards and the chapel. They rigged an electric alarm system using wiring stolen from unused sections of the castle. One buzz meant a guard was approaching the chapel. 2 buzzes meant stop everything. 3 meant they'd been spotted. They never hit 3. Noise was the enemy. Every saw cut, every hammer strike, every scrape of wood on wood could carry through stone walls and alert a patrol. The prisoners in the chapel organized concerts, choir rehearsals, language classes. Anything that generated enough sound to cover the work above. While a tenor practiced Schubert on the floor below, Bill Goldfinch was shaping a wing rib with a stolen kitchen knife on the floor above. The skin of the glider came from sleeping bags, blue and white checked cotton, carefully stitched together in panels and stretched over the wooden frame. To seal the fabric and make it airtight, they needed aircraft dope. They didn't have aircraft dope. What they had was German ration millet. Bess boiled the grain into a thick, starchy paste and painted it onto the cotton. Layer after layer. It dried into a taut, surprisingly effective coating. They tested small panels by holding them against the wind in the courtyard. The fabric held. Months passed. Autumn became winter. Winter became spring. The work continued in shifts, 4 men at a time, never longer than 2 hours, always with stooges in place, and the alarm system live. Goldfinch kept his drawings folded inside his shirt. If the workshop was discovered, the drawings had to survive. The drawings were the proof that this wasn't madness. That the engineering was sound. That it would fly. And here's what Goldfinch didn't know yet, what none of them knew, working in that cramped attic with sawdust in their hair and splinters in their fingers. The purpose of their glider was about to change. In March 1945, the Allied advance was accelerating. American guns could be heard from Colditz. A low, constant rumble that shook dust from the chapel ceiling. The prisoners had a clandestine radio. They knew the war was ending. But they also knew something else. After the Great Escape from Stalag Luft III the previous year, 50 recaptured officers had been executed on Hitler's direct order. 50 men. Shot. The War Office had sent word through coded channels, no more escape attempts. The risk of reprisal was too high. But the British escape officer at Colditz made a different calculation. The SS had units in the town below. If Berlin ordered the execution of prisoners in the final days, a last act of spite as the Reich collapsed, someone needed to reach the approaching American forces and warn them. The glider wasn't going to carry 2 escaping officers anymore. It was going to carry a message. A desperate, 9-second, bathtub-launched message: the prisoners at Colditz are about to be killed. Come now. The glider was nearly complete. The wings were finished. The fuselage was done. The control surfaces worked. The bathtub had been secretly filled with concrete, 1 bucket at a time, over weeks. The pulley system was rigged. Tables for the runway were stacked and ready. All they needed was a dark night and orders to fly. On April 15, 1945, the battle reached Colditz. American artillery from the 9th Armored Division hit the town from the south. German soldiers defended the bridge across the Mulde with Panzerfausts and small arms. Volkssturm militia built barricades from overturned tram cars. The prisoners heard every explosion, every burst of machine gun fire, felt the vibrations through the castle's 1,000-year-old walls. They waited. The alarm system was armed. The stooges were in position. Goldfinch and Bess sat in the attic with the glider ready. That night the Germans withdrew. Security Officer Reinhold Eggers, the only English-speaking German at Colditz, a man the prisoners respected despite everything, helped negotiate a quiet surrender. Guards laid down their weapons. The SS in the town melted away in the dark. At 8 in the morning on April 16th, soldiers from the 273rd Infantry Regiment, 69th Infantry Division, crossed the bridge and entered Colditz Castle. The prisoners hung American, British, and French flags from the ramparts. It was over. But Bill Goldfinch and Jack Best had one thing left to do. They went up to the attic. They pulled down the false wall. And for the first time, the very first time, they brought every piece of the glider down to the lower attic and assembled it. Wings attached. Control cables connected. Fabric skins stretched and sealed. The Colditz cock, that was what they named it, stood complete in a stone room where, for 5 years, men had dreamed of nothing but getting out. The American soldiers who walked in stopped dead. They stared. Some of them laughed, not mocking laughter, but the kind of laugh that escapes when the brain cannot process what the eyes are seeing. A full-sized aircraft. Built from bed slats and floorboards and sleeping bags and porridge. In the attic of a medieval castle. In the middle of Germany. By prisoners who had nothing but time, ingenuity, and the stubborn refusal to accept that walls meant the end. These 7 men planned every detail of an escape that never happened, and the story still demands to be heard. If you believe that deserves more than silence, subscribe. There are more stories like this. Built in places you wouldn't believe. War correspondent Lee Carson, assigned to the task force, took a photograph. One photograph. It became the only proof the Colditz cock ever existed. When the prisoners left 2 days later, Goldfinch folded his drawings and put them in his coat. The glider stayed behind. The Soviets took control of Saxony. Nobody came back for it. It probably ended up as firewood in the freezing winters that followed, 600 hand-carved pieces, burned for warmth by people who never knew what they were burning. For decades, the glider was dismissed as a myth. A tall tale told by old men. Then Goldfinch's drawings surfaced. In 1999, Channel 4 commissioned a full-scale replica built to his exact specifications. Jack Best was there, 80 years old, watching the aircraft he'd built with stolen razor blades take shape again in a Hampshire workshop. When test pilot John Lee launched the replica at RAF Odium, it flew. Climbed to 700 feet. Glided for 3 minutes. The engineering was sound. It always had been. Jack Best died later that year. Bill Goldfinch lived until 2007, building aircraft until his last day. On the morning after he died, a seaplane he'd been constructing at Old Sarum Airfield, a project he'd worked on 5 days a week for 11 years, was scheduled for its second set of taxiing trials. He never saw it move. Tony Rolt went back to racing. Won Le Mans in 1953 with a broken windshield and a co-driver everyone thought was mad. Pioneered four-wheel drive technology. Never attended a Colditz reunion. When asked about the escape attempts, he said one sentence. Escaping was not a game. Nor was it fun. It was a duty. The attic above the chapel at Colditz Castle is a museum now. A replica of the glider sits where the original was built, behind the same false wall. If you look closely at the floorboards, you can see where the spars were cut. The nail holes are still there. And in the corner, scratched into the stone with something sharp, maybe a stolen kitchen knife, maybe a sharpened spoon, there are marks. Tally marks. Nobody knows who carved them. Nobody knows what they were counting. Days. Pieces. Seconds of flight that never came. The chapel below still holds services. The sound rises through the floor into the attic the same way it did in 1944. Muffled hymns and organ notes pressing through stone. Back then, that sound was cover. Every chord masked a saw cut. Every hymn bought Goldfinch another 30 seconds of work. The choir never knew. Most of the 1,500 prisoners in the castle never knew. 52 men were involved in total. Builders, stooges, suppliers, and not one of them talked. Not during the war. Not under interrogation. Not when the guards searched the attic twice and found nothing but dust and silence. The Colditz cock was built by men who understood something most people never have to learn, that hope is not passive. It is engineered. Measured in wing ribs and pulley ratios and the precise tensile strength of a cotton sleeping bag sealed with grain paste. It is built in the dark, one piece at a time, by hands that refuse to stop.